Chapter 4 U.S. Army Intelligence Section MIS Report dated May 12, 1946. Title: Report on the Rice Bowl Hill Incident, 1944. Document number PTYX 722-8936-745-42216 WWN. The following is a taped interview with Dr. Juichi Nakazawa, 53, who ran an internal medicine clinic in name-deleted town at the time of the incident. Materials related to the interview can be accessed using application number PTYX 722-SQ-162-183. Impressions of the interviewer, Lieutenant Robert O'Connor. Dr. Nakazawa is so big-boned and dark-skinned. He looks more like a farm foreman than a doctor. He has a calm manner, but is very brisk and concise, and says exactly what's on his mind. Behind his glasses, his eyes have a very sharp, alert look, and his memory seems reliable. That's correct. At 11 a.m. on November 7, 1944, I received a phone call from the assistant principal at the local elementary school. I used to be the school doctor, or something close to it, so that's why they contacted me first. The assistant principal was terribly upset. He told me that an entire class had lost consciousness while on an outing in the hills to pick mushrooms. According to him, they were totally unconscious. Only the teacher in charge had remained conscious, and she had run back to school for help just then. She was so flustered, I couldn't wholly grasp the situation. But one fact did come through loud and clear. 16 children had collapsed in the woods. The kids were out picking mushrooms, so of course my first thought was that they had eaten some poisonous ones and been paralyzed. If that were the case, it would be difficult to treat. Different varieties of mushrooms have different toxicity levels, and the treatments vary. The most we could do at that moment would be to pump out their stomachs. In the case of highly toxic varieties though, the poison might enter the bloodstream quickly and we might be too late. Around here, several people a year die from poison mushrooms. I stuffed some emergency medical kit in my bag and rode my bike over to the school as fast as I could. The police had been contacted and 2 policemen were already there. We knew we had to get the unconscious kids back to town and would need all the help we could get. Most of the young men were away at war though, so we set off the best we had, myself, the 2 policemen, an elderly male teacher, the assistant principal, and principal, the school janitor, and of course the homeroom teacher who had been with the kids. We grabbed whatever bicycles we could find, but there weren't enough, so some of us rode 2 to a bike. What time did you arrive at the site? It was 11:55. I remember since I happened to glance at my watch when we got there. We rode our bicycles to the bottom of the hill as far as we could, then climbed the rest of the way on foot. By the time I arrived, several of the children had partially regained consciousness. 3 or 4 of them, as I recall. They weren't fully conscious though, sort of dizzily on all fours. The rest of the children were still unconscious. After a while, some of the others began to come around, their bodies undulating like so many big worms. It was a very strange sight. The children had collapsed in an odd, flat, open space in the woods where it looked like all the trees had been neatly removed, with autumn sunlight shining down brightly. And here you had, in this spot, or at the edges of it, 16 elementary school kids, scattered about prostrate on the ground, some of them starting to move, some of them completely still. The whole thing reminded me of some weird avant-garde play. For a moment I forgot that I was supposed to be treating the kids and just stood there, frozen, staring at the scene. Not just myself. Everyone in the rescue group reacted the same. paralyzed for a while by what they saw. This might be a strange way of putting it, perhaps, but it was like some mistake had occurred that allowed us to see a side people should never see. It was wartime, and I was always mentally prepared, as a physician, to deal with whatever came. In the remote possibility that something awful would occur way out here in the country, prepared as a citizen of Japan to calmly do my duty if the need arose. But when I saw this scene in the woods, I literally froze. I soon snapped out of it though and picked up one of the children, a little girl. Her body had no strength in it at all and was limp as a rag doll. Her breathing was steady, but she was still unconscious. Her eyes though were open, tracking something back and forth. I pulled a small flashlight out of my bag and shone it on her pupils. Completely unreactive, her eyes were functioning, watching something, yet showed no response to light. I picked up several other children and examined them, and they were all exactly the same, unresponsive. I found this quite bizarre. I next checked their pulse and temperature. The pulses were between 50 and 55, and all of them had temperatures just below 97. Somewhere around 96 and thereabouts, as I recall. That's correct. For children of that age, this pulse rate is well below normal. The body temperature more than 1 degree below average. I smelled their breath, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. Likewise with their throats and tongues. I immediately ascertained these weren't the symptoms of food poisoning. Not one of them had vomited or suffered diarrhea, and none of them seemed to be in any pain. If the children had eaten something bad, you could expect, with this much time having elapsed, the onset of at least one of these symptoms. I heaved a sigh of relief that it wasn't food poisoning. But then I was stumped, since I hadn't a clue what was wrong with them. The symptoms were similar to sunstroke. Kids often collapse from this in the summer. It's like it's contagious. Once one of them collapses, their friends all do the same, one after the other. But this was November, in a cool wood no less. 1 or 2 getting sunstroke is one thing, but 16 simultaneously coming down with it was out of the question. My next thought was some kind of poison gas or nerve gas, either naturally occurring or man-made. But how in the world could gas appear in the middle of the woods in such a remote part of the country? I couldn't account for it. Poison gas, though, would logically explain what I saw that day. Everyone breathed it in, went unconscious, and collapsed on the spot. The homeroom teacher had not collapsed because the concentration of gas wasn't strong enough to affect an adult. When it came to treating the children, though, I was totally at a loss. I am just a simple country doctor and have no special expertise in poison gases, so I was out of my league. We were out in this remote town and I couldn't very well ring up a specialist. Very gradually, in fact, some of the children were getting better, and I figured that perhaps with time they would all regain consciousness. I know it's an overly optimistic view, but at the time I couldn't think of anything else to do. So I suggested we just let them lie there quietly for a while and see what developed. Was there anything unusual in the air? I was concerned about that myself, so I took several deep breaths to see if I could detect any unusual odor. But it was just the smell of wood in the hills. It was a bracing scent, the fragrance of trees. Nothing unusual about the plants and flowers around there either. Nothing had changed shape or been discolored. One by one, I examined the mushrooms the children had been picking. There weren't all that many, which led me to conclude that they had collapsed not long after they began picking them. All of them were normal edible mushrooms. I have been a doctor here for some time, and I am quite familiar with different varieties. Of course, to be on the safe side, I collected them all and took them back and had an expert examine them. As far as I could tell, though, they were all your common or garden edible mushrooms. You said that the unconscious children's eyes moved back and forth. But did you notice any other unusual symptoms or reactions? For instance, the size of the pupils, the color of whites of the eyes, the frequency of their blinking? No. Other than their eyes moving back and forth like searchlights, there was nothing out of the ordinary. All other functions were completely normal. The children were looking at something. To put a finer point on it, the children weren't looking at what we could see, but at something we couldn't. It was more like they were observing something rather than just looking at it. They were essentially expressionless, but overall they seemed calm, not afraid or in any pain. That's also one of the reasons I decided to just let them lie there and see how things played out. I decided if they're not in any pain, then just let them be for a while. Did anyone mention the idea that the children had been gassed? Yes, they did. But like me, they couldn't figure out how it was possible. I mean, no one had ever heard of somebody going on a hike in the woods and ending up being gassed. Then one of the people there, the assistant principal, I believe it was, said it might have been gas dropped by the Americans. They must have dropped a bomb with poison gas, he said. The homeroom teacher recalled seeing what looked like a B-29 in the sky just before they started up the hill, flying directly overhead. That's it. Everyone said some new poison gas bomb the Americans had developed. Rumors about the Americans developing a new kind of bomb had even reached our neck of the woods. But why would the Americans drop the newest weapon in such an out-of-the-way place? That we couldn't explain. But mistakes are part of life, and some things we aren't meant to understand, I suppose. After this, then, the children gradually recovered on their own? They did. I can't tell you how relieved I was. At first, they started squirming around, then sat up unsteadily, gradually regaining consciousness. No one complained of any pain during this process. It was all very quiet, as if they were waking from a deep sleep. And as they regained consciousness, their eye movements became normal again. They showed normal reactions to light when I shone a flashlight in their eyes. It took some time, though, for them to be able to speak again, just as you are when you first wake up. We asked each of the children what had happened, but they looked dumbfounded, as if we were asking them about something they didn't remember taking place. Going up the hill, starting to gather mushrooms, that much they recalled. Everything after that was a total blank. They had no sense of any time passing between then and now. They started gathering mushrooms, then the curtain falls, and here they are, lying on the ground, surrounded by all these adults. The children couldn't figure out why we were all upset, staring at them with these worried looks on our faces. They seemed more afraid of us than anything else. Sadly, there was one child, a boy, who didn't regain consciousness. One of the children evacuated from Tokyo, Satoru Nakata, I believe his name was, a pale little boy. He was the only one who remained unconscious. He just lay there on the ground, his eyes moving back and forth. We had to carry him down the hill. The other children walked down as if nothing had happened. Other than that boy Nakata, none of the other children exhibited any symptoms later on. As far as any outward signs, at least, no. They displayed no unusual symptoms. No one complained of pain or discomfort. As soon as we got back to the school, I brought the children into the nurse's room one by one and examined them, took their temperature, listened to their heart with the stethoscope, checked their vision. Whatever I was able to do at the time, I did. I had them solve simple arithmetic problems, stand on one foot with their eyes closed, things like that. Physically, they were fine. They didn't seem tired and had a healthy appetite. They'd missed lunch, so they all said they were hungry. We gave them rice balls to eat, and they gobbled them up. A few days later, I stopped by the school to observe how the children were doing. I called a few of them into the nurse's room and questioned them. Again, though, everything seemed fine. No trace remained, physically or emotionally, from their strange experience. They couldn't even remember that it had happened. Their lives were back to normal, unaffected by the incident. They attended class as usual, sang songs, played outside during recess, everything normal kids did. Their homeroom teacher, however, was a different story. She still seemed in shock. That one boy, Nakata, though didn't regain consciousness. So the following day, he was taken to the university hospital in Kofu. After that, he was transferred to a military hospital and never came back to our town again. I never heard what became of him. This incident never made the newspapers. My guess is the authorities decided it would only cause unrest, so they censored any mention of it. You have to remember that during the war, the military tried to squelch whatever they saw as groundless rumors. The war wasn't going well, with the military retreating on the southern front, suicidal attacks one after the other, air raids on cities getting worse all the time. The military was especially afraid of any anti-war or pacifist sentiment cropping up among the populace. A few days after the incident, the police came calling and warned us that under no circumstances were we to talk about what we had seen. The whole thing was an odd, unpleasant affair. Even to this day, it's like a weight pressing down on me.